Dr. Arthur Schott, Smith Rep., 1869, page 391. We are reminded of the tiara and the triple round of sovereignty. In the same manner, the 10 kingdoms of Atlantis are perpetuated in all the ancient traditions. In the number given by the Bible for the antediluvian patriarchs, we have the first instance of a striking agreement with the traditions of various nations. 10 are mentioned in the book of Genesis. Other nations, to whatever epoch they carry back their ancestors, whether before or after the deluge, whether the mythical or historical character prevail, they are constant to this sacred number 10, which some have vainly attempted to connect with the speculations of later religious philosophers on the mystical value of numbers. In Chaldea, Berosus enumerates 10 antediluvian kings, whose fabulous reign extended to thousands of years. The legends of the Iranian race commence with the reign of 10 Poseidon, kings, men of the ancient law who lived on pure Homa, water of life, nectar, and who preserved their sanctity. In India, we meet with the 9 Brahmadikas, who, with Brahma, their founder, make 10, and who are called the 10 Petras, or fathers. The Chinese count 10 emperors, partakers of the divine nature, before the dawn of historical times. The Germans believed in the 10 ancestors of Odin, and the Arabs in the 10 mythical kings of the Adites. Lenormant and Chevalier, Ancient History of the East, Volume 1, page 13. The story of Plato finds confirmation from other sources. An extract preserved in Proclus, taken from a work now lost, which is quoted by Beck in his commentary on Plato, mentions islands in the exterior sea, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, and says it was known that in one of these islands the inhabitants preserved from their ancestors a remembrance of Atlantis, an extremely large island, which for a long time held dominion over all the islands of the Atlantic Ocean. Aelian, in his Varia Historia, Book 3, Chapter 18, tells us that Theopompus, 400 BC, relates the particulars of an interview between Midas, king of Phrygia, and Silenus, in which Silenus reported the existence of a large continent beyond the Atlantic, larger than Asia, Europe, and Libya together. He stated that a race of men, called Meropes, dwelt there and had extensive cities. They were persuaded that their country alone was a continent. Out of curiosity, some of them crossed the ocean and visited the Hyperboreans. The Gauls possessed traditions upon the subject of Atlantis which were collected by the Roman historian Timagenes, who lived in the 1st century before Christ. He represents that 3 distinct people dwelt in Gaul. 1. The indigenous population, which I suppose to be Mongoloids, who long dwelt in Europe. 2. The invaders from a distant island, which I understand to be Atlantis. 3. The Aryan Gauls. Preadamites, page 380. Marcellus, in a work on the Ethiopians, speaks of 7 islands lying in the Atlantic Ocean, probably the Canaries, and the inhabitants of these islands, he says, preserve the memory of a much greater island, Atlantis, which had for a long time exercised dominion over the smaller ones. Dido Müller, Fragmenta Historicorum Greciorum, Volume 4, page 443. Diodorus Siculus relates that the Phoenicians discovered a large island in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, several days' sail from the coast of Africa. This island abounded in all manner of riches. The soil was exceedingly fertile. The scenery was diversified by rivers, mountains, and forests. It was the custom of the inhabitants to retire during the summer to magnificent country houses, which stood in the midst of beautiful gardens. Fish and game were found in great abundance. The climate was delicious, and the trees bore fruit all seasons of the year. Homer, Plutarch, and other ancient writers mention islands situated in the Atlantic, several thousand stadia from the Pillars of Hercules. Silenus tells Midas that there was another continent besides Europe, Asia, and Africa, a country where gold and silver are so plentiful that they are esteemed no more than we esteem iron. Saint Clement, in his epistle to the Corinthians, says that there were other worlds beyond the ocean. Attention may here be called to the extraordinary number of instances in which allusion is made in the Old Testament to the islands of the sea, especially in Isaiah and Ezekiel. What had an inland people, like the Jews, to do with seas and islands? Did these references grow out of vague traditions linking their race with islands in the sea? The Orphic Argonaut sings of the division of the ancient Lyktonia into separate islands. He says, when the dark-haired Poseidon, in anger with Father Cronion, struck Lyktonia with the golden trident. Plato states that the Egyptians told Solon that the destruction of Atlantis occurred 9,000 years before that date, to wit, about 9,600 years before the Christian era. This looks like an extraordinarily long period of time, but it must be remembered that geologists claim that the remains of man found in the caves of Europe date back 500,000 years, and the fossil Calaveras skull was found deep under the base of Table Mountain, California, the whole mountain having been formed since the man to whom it belonged lived and died. M. Oppert read an essay at the Brussels Congress to show, from the astronomical observations of the Egyptians and Assyrians, that 11,542 years before our era, man existed on the earth at such a stage of civilization as to be able to take note of astronomical phenomena, and to calculate with considerable accuracy the length of the year. The Egyptians, he says, calculated by cycles of 1,460 years, zodiacal cycles, as they were called. Their year consisted of 365 days, which caused them to lose 1 day in every 4 solar years, and consequently, they would attain their original starting point again only after 1,460 years, 365 times 4. Therefore, the zodiacal cycle ending in the year 139 of our era commenced in the year 1322 BC. On the other hand, the Assyrian cycle was 1,805 years, or 22,325 lunations. An Assyrian cycle began 712 BC. The Chaldeans state that between the deluge and their first historic dynasty, there was a period of 39,180 years. Now what means this number? It stands for 12 Egyptian zodiacal cycles plus 12 Assyrian lunar cycles. 12 times 1,460 equals 17,520. 12 times 1,805 equals 21,660. Add the sums of the two equations, 17,520 plus 21,660. That equals 39,180. These two modes of calculating time are in agreement with each other and were known simultaneously to one people, the Chaldeans. Let us now build up the series of both cycles, starting with our era, and the results will be as follows. Zodiacal cycle 1,460. Lunar cycle 1,805. Zodiacal cycle 1,822. Lunar cycle 712. Zodiacal 2,782. Lunar 2,517. Zodiacal 4,242. Lunar 4,322. Zodiacal 5,702. Lunar 6,127. Zodiacal 7,162. Lunar 7,932. Zodiacal 8,622. Lunar 9,737. Zodiacal 110,082. Lunar 11,542. Zodiacal and lunar 11,542. At the year 11,542 BC, the two cycles came together, and consequently they had on that year their common origin in one and the same astronomical observation. That observation was probably made in Atlantis. The wide divergence of languages which is found to exist among the Atlanteans at the beginning of the historical period implies a vast lapse of time. The fact that the nations of the Old World remembered so little of Atlantis, except the colossal fact of its sudden and overwhelming destruction, would also seem to remove that event into a remote past. Herodotus tells us that he learned from the Egyptians that Hercules was one of their most ancient deities, and that he was one of the 12 produced from the 8 gods, 17,000 years before the reign of Amasis. In short, I fail to see why this story of Plato, told as history, derived from the Egyptians, a people who, it is known, preserved most ancient records, and who were able to trace their existence back to a vast antiquity, should have been contemptuously set aside as a fable by Greeks, Romans, and the modern world. It can be only because our predecessors, with their limited knowledge of the geological history of the world, did not believe it possible that any large part of the earth's surface could have been thus suddenly swallowed up by the sea. Let us then first address ourselves to that question.